Hey guys, it's Brendan here from Knitwits and Yarns. Hope all is well. I'm just going to be doing a little informational episode today about how to make a jumper. So I'm not going to actually show you how to make the jumper. I'm just going to provide you with a little bit of information and what you should expect. So I got a question through Instagram and I thought it would be better to do this via video than just typing it out and trying to explain it that way. So the first thing you want to do is you need to mentally prepare yourself for the journey because it's going to be a long one. It can take anywhere from a couple of days, depending on the thickness of yarn, to weeks and months. So it does take a fair bit of mental capacity to get through one of these. But what I would suggest is get yourself a book. So this is a men's knitting book, and I would highly recommend any male knitter or any knitter that wants to knit for men or likes that style. That book is a godsend. I'll post up the details on the description, but I think that's one of the best purchases that I've made through knitting. It's got a lot of great, simple, easy patterns in it. So this jumper itself, the dimensions roughly came from this book. I've made 10 or so, maybe 15 jumpers from this book. And just slowly change the sizes to fit me and fit what I enjoy. So I'll show you a few jumpers as well later on, but I would highly recommend getting that book. It's simple and it's really easy to follow those instructions. So once you get your pattern that you want to make, you need to size yourself up and you need to do a tension gauge as well, because with a jumper, if your tension's a little bit off, it's gonna really highlight it in the end product. So you're either going to have a massive jumper. My first jumper I made was large and it grew. But yeah, so I would do a tension square and I would figure out your sizing as well, because that's pretty important, because you're going to be putting in a lot of time. You want to make sure that your end product is what you want. You don't want to be not wasting. It's never really a waste, but you don't want to be spending a couple of weeks or so making a jumper and then not being happy with the end result. So I've done it in the past, and you know it's a learning curve for me, but you want to try and give yourself a head start really, and not be mentally drained by the end process. So I'll now cut to a few of my jumpers and I'll explain them as well. Okay, so this is one of my favorite jumpers here. This is a Raglan sleeve jumper and it came from that pattern book as well. The Raglan sleeve comes from the underarm and heads towards the neck, and you can see that it's nice, like it sits nicely with your shoulder as well. Like I'm a pretty slim and slender kind of guy, so it's a really well-fitting kind of jumper, and the colour's kind of growing on me as well. So this one's made with an 8-ply, not too sure with the conversions in American, but it took maybe, I think, 3 weeks. So 8-ply is quite thin. It's like a medium kind of weighted yarn, and it takes maybe 3 or so weeks to make. So it's a big investment on that one. Obviously, the thicker your yarn, the quicker it's going to be, because you're using thicker yarn and you're also using thicker needles. So just keep that in mind as well. That pattern book has, I think, 8, 10 and 12 ply patterns in it. So for each jumper, it does have different thicknesses, which is great. I'll show you another jumper now. Alright, so this is a similar, well, it's exactly the same pattern as well. Probably a different size, I've probably adjusted it, but I've just added a few color stripes in there. So it's the exact same jumper pattern. All I did was added some more colors in there, and it just changes it up from just a plain to something a little bit more unique, I guess. This one's the Raglan as well. The next one I'll show you is a drop sleeve or a set-in sleeve jumper. Also remember, this one's wool. I actually hand dyed these colors myself. It's important, you probably can't see it, or you can see it actually, that the colors kind of semi-change in this red part. That's partly my dyeing, but what you got to remember is when you're buying a jumper or the wool for a jumper, you're buying a significant amount of wool, and you got to make sure that you're buying the exact same dye lot, because if you don't have the same dye lot, you're going to have stripes like this kind of going through your jumper, and it will stick out a lot if the dye lot's even just slightly different. So remember that if you are going into a store, any of the shop workers will make sure that the dye lots are the same. I'm not too sure what happens when you buy stuff online. I assume that they do grab all the dye lots and send them to you. But if you are just going to a shop, I would buy more than you need, because if you come back in 3 weeks' time and the dye lot's changed, and I've seen it happen so many times in the shop, and people don't realise, but I would definitely get a few extra balls, because in the end, if you got a few extra, you can always make yourself a beanie or a scarf that matches, but the dye lot's really important. Otherwise, you are just going to have, you're going to have different shades pretty much in your jumper. That's another reason why I don't really like people buying me wool for like presents and stuff. Like, it's a nice gesture and everything, but I think my mum and my sister both got me yarn from New Zealand, and it's a really nice possum yarn, but they've got me different lots, and then I needed to order another lot, so I ended up having 3 different lots for the one colour, and I'm going to have to figure out how to incorporate this into a jumper or something, I guess. So even though it's like amazing yarn, the dye lots are different, and even the smallest little change sticks out like you wouldn't believe. So I'll show you another jumper now. Okay, so this one's my most recent jumper, and this is probably one of my favourite as well, because it's my first cable jumper. So I don't know if you can see it properly with the sun coming into the room, but that's just a drop sleeve. So it goes from the underarm and it just goes straight up. Makes it much easier to chuck in this cable design, whereas the Raglan, it went from the underarm to the neck. This base jumper, so the basic part of the jumper, came from that same pattern book as well. So all I did was develop my own dimensions pretty much from that pattern, and then just chucked in my own cable design. One of the other things, it does take a lot of time, like I said before, to make a jumper, but also the money. So it depends, I guess, how much money you have and how much you're willing to spend. When I started off, I used acrylic just because I didn't want to invest too much money into my knitting. And so maybe a jumper might cost me, I think, maybe $50, if that, to make with acrylic, and it would last me 3 weeks. So people think it's an expensive hobby, and sometimes it can be, but that's what, $15 a week, so it's not much. And you can always just chuck your acrylic jumper. So this is my first one. It's big and it's baggy, but I wear this to bed and whatnot. You just chuck it in the wash with anything else. I'm not very caring of my wool, unfortunately. So something like this is made with wool, and I have to be much more careful when I'm washing it and whatnot. I'll just summarize as well to what you have to think about. So it takes a lot of time to make a jumper. So prepare yourself mentally, because time's important to everyone, I guess. And just be aware that it does take time, and not to rush it, because your end product's gonna show if you do rush it. The dye lots is very important as well, so make sure you have a consistent dye lot, because otherwise that will show in the end product as well. Make sure you have your right tension and your sizing, because again, it all shows up in the end product. And lastly, just remember to enjoy the process, because when you do finish a jumper, it's super rewarding. I remember the video actually of me finishing this jumper is on my Instagram, and I don't know, I guess I can be emotional in general anyway, but when I finished that jumper and when I took that video, that was like, I don't know, I was so overwhelmed with emotions, just because it was such a process, and it was my first cable jumper. So it's super rewarding to make your own clothes, and do remember, just take your time and just enjoy the process as well. Like, I love finishing a project, but sometimes it's just that mindless knitting that just gets you through as well. So a jumper isn't actually that hard. So just remember, it takes time, and it's only as hard as you want it to be. So that's my whole message throughout knitting. When anyone ever talks to me about knitting, I just say it's as simple as you want to make it, or it's as complex as you want to make it. This jumper is just stocking stitch here, and I could have just kept on going and it would have just been such a simple jumper, but I decided to chuck a few cables in and challenge myself a little bit. So it's really what I wanted to make of it, but your journey is what you want to make it. So just remember, if you want to make it complex, you can. Knitting's super simple if you want to keep it simple. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll be posting more videos and more how-tos or informational kind of videos to try and get you through and try and teach you a few things that I learned along the way as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. Good luck if you're making your first jumper, and I'll speak to you guys soon. Cheers.